All right, so my presentation today is on introduction to bootstrapping, and I'll give you an introduction to what bootstrapping is overall, as well as talk about a variety of different business models that you can employ yourselves to actually start your own businesses, ideally with very little capital up front and full freedom to do what you really enjoy. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from the United States, mostly California, and was last working there in San Francisco before I moved abroad to Tokyo. So I lived in Tokyo for 2 years, and then I moved here about 3 years ago, and I worked at a couple companies here as a product manager. But what I actually want to talk more about is the fact that I've got a couple of side projects that are bootstrapped, and I'll talk about what that means in just a second. But one of them is called Expat Empire. That's my main one, where I released a book and a podcast called the Expat Empire podcast, which I'm currently releasing more episodes for. I'm starting something on the side called no-code bootstrapping. Basically what that is to be able to take the learnings that I've had through the conversations I've had with a variety of people across the bootstrapping space here in Berlin and otherwise, and be able to take my own insights from projects that I've had to be able to share those with other people and create online courses. So I'm just starting that now. It's basically just a mailing list, but I want to develop that to something more substantial in the future. And then, as Thomas mentioned, we met through Berlin Bootstrappers, which I did for over a year, and we did 10 different live events. I started that project just with some friends, basically at a bar here in Berlin. Eventually moved to upwards of 50, 60 people per event. And we had a lot of different speakers talking about their bootstrapping experience and to basically allow people to network, find partners, find first users, and talk about their learnings to be able to share with a broader audience. So it was a really cool thing that I was involved with, and I really enjoyed it. I finished it last December. That was the last event, ultimately, based on the fact that I've got a full-time job as a product manager, and I'm working on these other side projects that seem like they had a bit more interest for me, I guess, in the end. So that's enough of my background. Let's talk about bootstrapping. So as you guys probably know, probably covered it around the business case idea in this class, among others. This is a typical startup route. So you get investors to really fund your brilliant idea. They give you some money. That's the good news. The bad news is that you have to give up sometimes, especially in the early stages, upwards of 50% of your ownership stake. And so ultimately they become the owners of your business perhaps more than you in terms of ownership for as far as your investors are concerned. And so that actually means that you go from being some very small company, maybe just yourself and a few people, to trying to scale up as quickly as possible, adding in lots of layers of hierarchy, adding in tons of folks, and you have to think about HR and everything else. It's a lot of overhead and a lot of quick growth. The tough part there is that costs a lot of money, and your money and your funds will typically decrease sometimes more quickly than your metrics. And if that happens, it can be very difficult for you to actually raise more money. So what's most likely is that you end up with nothing, and maybe you go bankrupt. What's unlikely, but still possible, is this notion of this massive wealth that you can gain by having this startup, by having a lot of investors, and hopefully reaching that product market fit and really scaling it forward. So a lot of people take that gamble. That's fine, that's one route. But I think that there's another route that's important to talk about that's called bootstrapping. And so the definition that I provide for this, although different people you talk to will say different things, it's basically any business that primarily sells online and does not initially raise outside funding. So that doesn't mean that the company couldn't raise a couple years down the road. Obviously, there's different growth potential, there's different markets that you can tackle with raising funding, and I don't want to count those companies out because if you're running a business by yourself, with your friends, with a couple people, for a few years without raising outside funds, it's already very tough to do. So I definitely want to include those folks in this business. And it tends to also, be primarily online. Of course, it could have a physical component, but ultimately being online allows it to scale a lot more quickly and with less cost typically. So bootstrapping is different, and what I mean by that is it's pretty much keeping either you in a DIY, do-it-yourself type scenario or with a small team, and it also makes you ultimately focus on revenue a lot more closely and certainly your savings, because that's what you're working through as you're not raising outside funding. So what that means is instead of going around the investors, asking for cash, always needing the next round and being able to ultimately have to give them ownership of your company as well and meet their targets and goals in order to get the next round of funding in hopes that you don't go bankrupt. This actually allows you to be much more it may take a longer time horizon, but to be less time sensitive and to think about growing money and being revenue focused from the very beginning over time. So it allows you to maintain full control. It doesn't require you to be a unicorn to be successful. It could just be, how much do you want to make in a year? 100 grand. I'm not saying it's easy to make that from doing a bootstrap business, but what I am saying is that it's a lot more feasible, I think, and you have a higher chance of doing that if you're focused on it in a very, I don't know, how would you say, like a very process-focused way as you go through things, as opposed to just trying to have that very small chance of becoming a unicorn company worth more than $1 billion, as an example. And it also enables you to have financial and location freedom. So maybe if you want to work from the beach somewhere, you want to be able to work from home. These are things that are still unfortunately difficult to find in a typical office environment that really promotes everyone being on the same campus together at the same time. So that to me is a very attractive part of bootstrapping businesses as well. So in this presentation now we're going to talk about some potential bootstrap business models that you as well can employ in your businesses, as well as how to start your businesses without code. At least for me, I'm not a developer. I can write some queries to get the data that I need to be a good product manager, but I also want to say that you can do these things without having to be a hands-on developer, and so that's pretty exciting to me as well. So the first type of businesses that I'll talk about in terms of different bootstrap business models are content businesses. So you've probably heard of podcasts. I think most people have now. I just heard from a friend this morning, I got a message saying that the Obamas are actually going to start their own podcast in partnership with Spotify. So pretty much everybody's getting in on this thing now, myself included. So as you probably know, maybe, or these at least are popular in the US, the Joe Rogan podcast, Mark Maron, WTF podcast. Those are obviously more about their personalities, the fact that they're very famous people and able to get a lot of followers and listeners that way. But there's also a lot of startup-focused stuff. So Startup Stories with Mixergy, there's Startups The Rest of Us, which I think is a fantastic podcast with two guys who have really gotten into the bootstrapping scene, and you'll learn a ton from that, so I strongly recommend it. And then I just wanted to throw out mine as well, because I've got 10 episodes, actually 11, the 11th one just came out. So that's me trying to get into this as well and see what I can do to leverage podcasting medium to find more of an audience. So as far as evaluating this business model, there's very low investment when you need to make a podcast. I got all my equipment for under 200 euro, and then I got podcast hosting for like 100 euro per year. So it's actually very feasible for you to start this, which is also why there's hundreds of thousands of them. But it also allows you to talk about what you love and focus in on something different and be able to connect with people through an audio medium that in a way that you really can't otherwise, because you're really talking into their ear. You basically make a relationship with them as a listener, even though it tends to be one way. People feel like you're able to really develop that connection despite that. And so yeah, it's just definitely much more immersive than images. I feel like when people are listening to a podcast, they're probably on a commute, they're doing something that they need to do, they're getting from A to B, and during that time you can be very focused on the audio as opposed to having to sit down and actually compete with looking at pictures, your Facebook feed, videos on YouTube, and so on. On the difficult side, the con side, it's difficult without a brand name or distribution company. I know this firsthand. Having to try to start this with basically friends and family, get a couple of episodes out, try to put it on social media, try to get it out there. I will say that I feel, and I can see in the data, that my podcast is gaining a little bit of traction, but it still pales in comparison to what other people have been able to do with podcast distribution companies or their own brand name, like the Joe Rogan podcast, as I mentioned. There's also some advertising, which is great in terms of being able to make money from it. In fact, maybe you've already seen that Spotify purchased 2 podcast networks, including Gimlet Media, which is one of the top ones, at least in the US. And so there's monetization potential there. There's a lot of investment going on as far as the investors are concerned. But it's still in the early stages, and you have to be able to get a big enough audience to be able to really make any money from it. So from the podcast right now, I have no ads. I'm just doing it out of, to see what will happen and to have my own fun experience doing it. And if it gets to the point where it has a large enough audience, then I'm all about monetizing it, don't get me wrong. But you need to be able to reach that certain threshold to be able to make it worth your time. So another idea around content businesses that you can look at as far as doing Bootstrap Businesses are newsletters. So you've got stuff like Scott's Cheap Flights, which I believe is, last I read, was making more than $4 million in revenue a year. Basically, it's a newsletter that comes out multiple times a day that gives you the cheapest flights from your region, so from the EU to somewhere else. And you can pay for a premium subscription that gives you more newsletters or more emails per day with more alerts, so you find out about more flights and you find out about them for the free subscribers. So I really like that business model because it gives a good value to the premium subscription, and my sister loves it so much that she re-ups her subscription every year, so I think that's really cool. And then there's another newsletter as an example is Technik, not 100% sure to say it, but it's a fantastic newsletter that I recommend. It's free, it comes out once a week. Of course, if you subscribe, then you get one per day. But it's really good, in-depth tech news and analysis, so it's really good. So if you want to create your own newsletters, there's plenty of ways to do that, plenty of platforms and services to use. One of them is Review, and that is, I think, free up to 50 or so subscribers, last I checked. And what that allows you to do is very easily create your own personal newsletter to send to other people. So whether you want to do that under your brand name, whatever that might be, in my case, Expat Empire is an example, you could do that, or your name's newsletter. And maybe you start with 1, 2, 5, 10 subscribers, friends and family, but the idea is that you create good content, be able to get that shared on social media, get that shared in other channels as well, and you become maybe an authority around something or someone that people find influential or someone worth following, and ultimately that's how you grow from there. There's also MailChimp, which is the one that I use, and the reason I use it is because you get 2,000 subscribers for free, up to 6 emails per month per subscriber, so up to 12,000 emails per month. Don't worry, I'm not that far yet, so I'm not close to breaking that quite yet, but it's very easy to use, and ultimately a lot of the tools that I'm using are as cheap as possible so that I don't have to pay for it out of pocket. So for this evaluation, as far as the newsletters are concerned as a business model, it's very easy to set up, and you can either create content yourself or curate content on behalf of your readers. So as an example, if, let's just talk about Scott's Cheap Flights again. It's the fact that there's a bajillion different flights out there, and that they're actually going through and checking all the different routes to find the best deals, that makes it valuable. So part of that is just basically taking all the flights in the world and figuring out the best routes to make people excited enough to pay for your premium subscription. On the con side, it requires a significant number of dedicated readers to make money, and the way that you'd make money on this is either through those premium subscriptions or potentially having advertising in your newsletter if you were to reach that level of scale. So, ebooks. There's a couple of things to talk about here. First and foremost, I strongly recommend the book on the left-hand side. Start small, stay small, Developer's Guide to Launching a Startup. As I mentioned, I'm not a developer, so you can still read it and enjoy it. And I found this extremely helpful as far as bootstrapping a business. This is one of the key guys, Rob Walling, who's doing this. The 7-Day Startup is also a great one by Dan Norris. And I released my own book. I did this in July of last year, and so I basically put it on a number of different distribution channels. I've also created a paperback version, and this is all self-published. So I wrote the book in about 9 months or so, 10 months, and got some friends to help edit it and put it out there and tried to make some social media buzz, make all the pages, get up on YouTube, on medium.com, of course, Facebook, Twitter, and everything else, and just get this book out there and get it in front of as many possible purchasers as I could. So these are all paid products. So for ebooks, it's easy to do by yourself on your own time with free tools. So I used Apple's Pages app. That's how I wrote the book. And I pretty much just figured out what I wanted to write, in what order, figure out the structure of the book, what it would actually contain, and then just knock out section by section. And I did that over numerous months. And so you put the work in once and get sales for years. So the idea here is now that it's out and available and finished, of course I could do an updated version, I could write a separate book that's about a different topic. Mine was about living and working in Japan, which is something that I'm very passionate about and was able to do. And so, but now I can actually put it into other distribution channels and be able to use that same content to drive more sales. On the con side, it's easy to get lost in the thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of self-published titles at this point. And ultimately, the people who do this full-time that are really making good money from it, they have their book series, and maybe it's more fiction books, or maybe it's non-fiction, but they really go through and make volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. So since I'm doing this on the side of a full-time job, I focused on getting that first book out and trying to optimize that as much as possible. But yeah, this is a challenge here, as with most of these businesses, because the barriers to entry are relatively low. It does take time to write a book, but the costs are very low as well. So you also become ultimately overly reliant on distribution platforms, and what I mean by that is Amazon. So Amazon is the key place to distribute ebook content, as you probably know. There's plenty of other stores as well, but with much less volume. So if Amazon changes their terms or somehow doesn't want your product on their site for whatever reason, then that can create some challenges for you as well. So I also want to talk about online courses, another business model around content. So here you have Coursera, Udemy, Skillshare. I'm also trying to start no-code bootstrapping, but it's more for my own stuff, and I'll still post it on these other channels to the extent that I can. But the idea here is to, of course, make content that people can view online, purchase that at a premium price, and then use that to also build your own personal brand name and your knowledge in the space. So it's easy to become considered an expert these days. So because I started Berlin Bootstrappers, even though at the time I hadn't actually started a bootstrap company myself, it created that sort of association, and obviously I got to meet a lot of people.
You cheated on me.
Well, now I'm an expert.
Now he's an expert, but when I thought he's an expert, he wasn't.
That's true. But now, since then, that also gave me the confidence and courage and know-how to actually go and create this podcast, to create the ebook, to create some websites, and of course build Berlin Bootstrappers to the point where it had significant numbers of members. And actually I was able to charge for some of the events, which is really cool. So you also, once again, put the work in once and get sales for years by making this content, which takes a long time. Then you can put it up, distribute it on multiple channels, and hopefully sell it over many years, as long as the content is still relevant. On the con side, it requires significant time investment, of course, and as you've heard before, crowded and competitive marketplace. So if you want to make a course on marketing, on SEO, on paid marketing, there's already tons of courses with 5-star reviews. So it can be more difficult to actually break out from that and become a target for people's attention. I'm going to stop there and just see if there are any questions. We've been talking for a while. Anything? Everyone's following? Okay, cool. So next we can talk about selling goods and services. So you might have heard of some of these sites, eBay naturally, Facebook Marketplace, Etsy, but there are places, many more than this as well, where you can sell your own items online. That might be things that you're producing, it might be something that you're buying from another country and selling over here in the German market. But this is a great way to be able to kind of build an online business yourself. Even more interestingly, maybe you've heard of Shopify, but this actually is a great service that allows you to be able to build an e-commerce website yourself very quickly for relatively low cost, and be able to get analytics around it, be able to do a lot of the marketing that you need to do, be successful, also do payments and refunds and pretty much everything else. So it's pretty amazing what this type of product can do, and ultimately I believe it's just a monthly fee. So that can help you to get started and get off the ground. So it's very easy to list your products and get started. As I mentioned, Shopify is a great way to do that. And you also get some product discovery benefits by being on a larger marketplace. So if everyone is on Etsy, if everyone's on eBay, if everyone's on Facebook already, then you can actually be able to be found within that context by having users that might buy your products be shown the product through the algorithm and in terms of suggested products. But of course, the difficult side is, once again, you're either in a competitive marketplace where there's tons of other options and it's hard to stick out, or you end up needing to build your own audience. And you can do that by having your own website, but of course you've got to drive traffic there, as I've learned the hard way myself as well. And then naturally, if you have to deal with physical goods and actually delivering that, that can be a challenge as well. And you kind of have to figure out the logistics, how do you deal with returns, how you deal with shipments, what if there's a problem, customer support, so all of that stuff makes it difficult. But I wanted to talk about a different model that a lot of people are utilizing, It certainly had a peak, and I think it's still popular, but a little bit waning in interest these days. But just to talk about it, so I recently bought this clock, this like light-up clock, on Amazon, and basically it was manufactured in China. I gathered that because I was looking at the instruction manual, and it looked to be written primarily in Chinese. So then let's say that you want to have that shipped, if you were living in the US as an example, or here in Germany. So you'd actually have the shipment happen, and it would be under this notion of fulfillment by Amazon. So ultimately, it would be located in one of the Amazon warehouses. And so when the customer, like myself, makes the order, Amazon actually deals with the delivery and with the returns and customer service. So of course, you have to pay them a portion of the cost of your product or overall fee for this type of service to be able to have a fulfillment by Amazon product. But it takes a lot of the overhead away from having to deal with logistics of shipping and returns. So it's an interesting business if you want to get to the physical goods space. But you know, Amazon is Amazon, and that can be difficult to deal with a lot of the competition in crowded marketplace as well. So it's really good because it's a turnkey solution with global distribution, and you don't actually have to hold the physical inventory yourself. Warehousing is a huge overhead cost, especially if you have a lot of product up front and you're waiting for the customers to buy. So not having to spend the money on warehousing it yourself is fantastic. But of course, you're tied to Amazon and any changes that they make to their terms of service, which they do on a very frequent basis. So that can create a challenging environment to deal with. High working capital requirements. So basically, these businesses tend to purchase a lot of product, and then whatever sales that they get, they end up using that to purchase more product. And so you end up having to basically reinvest in the business for a long time until it gets really going quickly and you're able to take money out of the business or sell it. And so there's also this notion of finding products on Amazon with an attractive profit margin that you feel like you could still be ranked number 1, 2, 3, 4 and get on the first page of results. Because as you probably know, at least in my experience using Amazon, is I usually find what I want on the first page of results. So it's the same with Google, right? You want to be in those top positions in the search engine results page. So if you take it outside of physical goods and digital goods, you can actually think also about selling your services. So there's some websites like Fiverr, Upwork, there's plenty more. I'm sure that there's a great number of European similar websites. But essentially what that allows you to do is to say, hey, I'm great at doing SEO marketing, or I'm good at doing some sort of translation work, or whatever it might be, copywriting, be able to build your skill set, be able to build your business on your time using those particular skill sets. So it's great because you can work from anywhere, you can manage your time. Basically, hey, I'll deliver this within the next 3 days, and then if you want to do that working at night, if you want to do that from the beach or from a hotel, you can absolutely do that. But of course, naturally, as you have a lot of freelance marketplaces and a lot of people vying for that work, especially from countries that maybe have a lower cost of living than Germany, for example, then you also have downward price pressure. So it's easy for the purchaser, the customer, to say, I'm going to take the lowest cost option because I don't have much, money to spend on it. But that can ultimately create a challenging environment for you to make enough money in terms of your hourly wage. And then also the difficulty here is turning this into a business that makes money while you sleep. That's something that a lot of people want to do as they build their bootstrap businesses. I wake up in the morning and I have another $600. I wasn't actually working during that time, but the products and the businesses that I put online manage themselves. They're self-sufficient, and people are coming in at all times and making purchases. So it'd be difficult to do that here. But I can talk about some ways that you can mitigate that by selling recurring goods and services. But before I do that, let me grab a drink. If you guys have any questions as well, happy to. Alright. So as we move to recurring services, this is something that's interesting. So I don't know if any of you have bought one of these before, but subscription boxes are pretty cool. So they have snack crate as an example. Outfittery is one you've probably heard of here in Germany and Berlin. There's Birchbox, Dollar Shave Club. So the idea here is that on a monthly, weekly basis, whatever the iteration, the cycle is for the company, you're getting a box of content, well, actually physical goods that are interesting to you, and that ultimately creates that customer lock-in. Yeah.
Birchbox, what are they offering as a?
I believe Birchbox is more around makeup and cosmetics. It's probably more, maybe these are some names I know
I don't know it.
yeah, these are probably some names from the US as well. The Dollar Shave Club was sold for $1 billion. And this is purely disposable razors that are sent every month. That's crazy. So these are real businesses. It's pretty impressive. So if you want to start your own, there's actually now companies that provide a platform, a service offering like Greatjoy to make your own subscription box. And so pretty much any of these models, as you saw with Shopify as well, if you want some help from another company, another service to be able to make your own product in this space, there's probably somebody already doing that. As an example, I heard recently that there's also companies making the infrastructure to make scooter apps. Because if you've heard of Flying Bird, some of these scooter companies that are popping up these days, in fact, I think scooters are coming to Germany this month from whatever they're doing.
I think it's called.
Yes, yeah.
Hamburg.
Yeah. There's there's local competitors coming up in native markets, but there's a lot of these companies that are basically providing the infrastructure and tools, analytics, solutions, and logistics for you to be able to create these businesses. So the subscription boxes are cool because there's high customer retention. Of course, they're paying on a monthly basis. They're getting something every month as well, or a week. And once you have logistics systems and processes in place, it's relatively easy to scale. So if you get one more person buying a box of stuff, the box is probably similar across most customers, depends on how much personalization that there is. I think something like Outfittery is more personalized as an example, but ultimately it allows you just to add in customers and just buy more of the same product because it's the curation element that makes it interesting. So high degree of product curation, as I mentioned, and high upfront capital costs in terms of getting the product out to the customer and be able to start this thing going to be able to get ultimately some benefits of scale over time. You could also create an online community membership service. So these are to Founder Cafe and DC, which is a Dynamite Circle, I believe it's called, that allow you, that's basically, in this case, about bootstrap businesses, so you can connect with people around the world about bootstrapping. That's why I picked these. There's plenty of other online paid community memberships as well, but this is something that you can leverage the global scale, despite the fact that people are all around the world, that they can connect online, and if you provide enough interesting content, enough interesting people, then people will be willing to pay for it. So if you do create content for it, which is the way that a lot of these get started, so it's got classes, it's got reading materials, and then it's got the whole element of the community so that you can talk and network with people, then it's great because you have evergreen content and connections and built-in network effects, which of course means that the more people that join, the more value that each member gets. But on the other side, you've got to actually provide a significant value to convince users to pay. Why would I join this if there's only 10 people, as an example? And it's also hard to kickstart because you actually have to get people, you have to have enough content to get it started and then build that network and that notoriety and that becoming famous in that space to be able to have more people search it out and be able to join it. But that's a cold start problem that most businesses have. So. One other thing I want to talk about here is a productized service. Maybe you haven't heard of this term before, but I think it could be an interesting business model if you have some unique skill sets. So let's say that you're a copywriter. Of course, as we've talked about before, you can only sell that sort of experience, your knowledge there, and your work around it on an hourly basis typically, or maybe you do on a per project basis. But what this ultimately allows you to do is be able to scale up a specific service in a way that can be automated through scalable, repeatable processes. So to give a specific example, here's a number of companies doing it. So Copy Hackers is doing more on the side of copywriting. And so if you're thinking about copywriting, so focus on a service that you already know well, so you're the key copywriter, right? And basically you can simplify your offerings into a set number of discrete packages that might just be one thing. So, hey, I can do one copywriting for 49 euros and just make a package out of it, or 3 for 100, whatever it might be. And then you find clients for that specific package service. Okay, so they want to pay you 49 euros for that one article. And then you hire people to implement the service package. So as opposed to only you doing it yourself, now you've got people that are actually managing that part, and you basically are able to be at the top of the business, managing, finding more clients for that particular service package, and then building out the infrastructure to deliver that. So it's basically a way of building, in essence, a scalable agency business. And then you can automate the work through that process. So it actually allows you to basically take yourself out of the business and ultimately have the managers and all of the executors working beneath you. So the pro side, it can be built around your area of expertise, which is always great. And you can eventually scale it to the point that you do not need to be involved in it day to day. And that basically means that it's got enough projects coming in, or maybe you're able to actually get people that are able to market your services around those particular packages and be able to get more clients that way. But it also essentially requires running an agency focused on a single key business process. So if you're looking for variety in terms of your day-to-day, or if you don't want to necessarily always be working on behalf of somebody else, building your own content, it probably doesn't allow you to do that as much. But you do see some of these businesses also create a separate digital product that they can then sell for a subscription service or one-time purchase. Take a quick break before we go into software products. Any questions? All good?
This last model, the productized services, when did you come up with this, or where did you hear from it? And I think this is, it's a big trend, but it's hard to produce it actually.
Yeah.
I
think it was in a number of books and podcasts I listened to and so on. So I've read about it that way, and as I'm showing today, there's a ton of different ways that you can build a bootstrap business yourself with relatively low capital. This is one of many ways, and I don't think it's necessarily a crazy idea as far as building an agency business, because those exist in plenty of places, and certainly before there's this name productized service. I think what the difference here is that you're really simplifying what you're providing to the client. So as opposed to, oh, let me come up with a very specific solution for what you need, and come up with a very complicated invoice, and like, oh, we need this and this overhead, and I need to scale up the team this way to be able to provide that. This is really about, hey, this is exactly what we do. We have between 1 and 3 packaged offerings, so if that's what you want, great. Buy it now, pay us now, or whatever it might be. But if you need something else that's more specific to your business, then we're not the people for you. So I think it's about having that focus, and then finding ultimately people who can provide that relatively straightforward package solution in a way that, of course, is profitable for your business and can scale. You have to find ultimately the talent to be able to do that. So I do think it's only in some certain key areas, like as an example, WP Curve and many others are focused on managed WordPress solutions. So WordPress being, and we'll talk about that in the software products in a second, but being a main way that many businesses run their websites. Restaurant Engine is more focused on the restaurant space, of course, and managing SEO and marketing for that. I believe Three Wise Bears, if I'm not mistaken, is more focused on accounting. So there are certain areas where you can think about a more general product that requires some expertise, and then building basically a SaaS solution package around that. So you can say this will cost us in terms of paying our employees 2 hours or 5 hours to do, and we get paid the equivalent of 7, 10 hours, whatever it might be. So I think it's just more about simplicity and figuring out how you can scale it. But the core business model is not necessarily something unique.
Okay, and what's Copy Hackers doing?
Copy Hackers is on the copywriting side. So basically, either actually writing article content or editing.
Okay, cool. I think there exist those kind of services also for startup business plan writing.
Right.
I think I came across this kind of productized services.
Yeah, I think it's a cool idea. I met someone who was building a productized service around technical document writing, but also maybe technical blog posts. So it's very specific, but also if you can find the right talent from countries where the cost structure makes sense for you to be able to do this in a way that's also profitable for you, then yeah, I was saying that he was able to actually scale it pretty well. You need to tap into something that you're knowledgeable about, that you're maybe passionate about, and can find people to do that, and then that isn't already met by a typical market solution. Okay, so moving on to software products. So there's a couple of bootstrap business models that make sense for software products as well. So you have software licensed businesses like AppSumo and Humble Bundle. Perhaps you've heard of some of these, but basically what they do is they tend to, once again, using the element of curation, take a lot of licensed products. So AppSumo will take everything related to being an entrepreneur and starting your digital business as an example. And whereas each individual product might cost, in total, if you added up the price, 299 euro, they'd sell it to you for 99 euro. So essentially, you're getting a good deal by buying a packaged digital product, or a multitude of digital products. And each of those companies are happy to get however many millions of views that they can get by having a daily deal on AppSumo. So it's ultimately, AppSumo itself, of course, is building the audience and the network to be able to sell this product to, but they aren't necessarily creating the product themselves. They're just sort of a marketing way to market this and get more sales for those other businesses. Humble Bundle is focused typically more on games, but they did it in an interesting way where they were able to have much cheaper deals on games on a monthly or weekly basis, but then ask the purchasers how much of that money they want to give the developer or to give to a charity. So they did it in a way that has actually scaled incredibly well. So the pro here is that it's as simple as bundling products together and selling them at a discount. That's the two examples that I mentioned. And they also don't have to hold on to an inventory of digital goods. I mean, ultimately they're just connecting the different partners and it's all done online anyway. The cons, of course, requires a very large audience to be able to get that momentum and even get things started. And also negotiating deals becomes your business model, so how much of a discount will each partner take to make that up in terms of volume. You've probably heard of software as a service businesses, SaaS businesses. There's many, many, many more than this, but these are a few that I want to put up here, of which most of these at some point were bootstrap businesses. So MailChimp is email, we talked about that, SurveyMonkey for surveys. Trello is a project task management tool that I've used in other companies before. GitHub, of course, is focused on software development and version control and working collaboration across teams. Drip is also email marketing tool that competes with MailChimp, but it more focuses on email automation. And then Basecamp is another project management tool. So a number of these have been purchased. I think Trello was bought by Atlassian for a couple $100 million. SurveyMonkey, remember it was at some time valued, I believe, over $1 billion, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong about that. MailChimp's quite a bit as well, Basecamp. So these are cool businesses. Basically what they do is provide these services to other businesses and they get a monthly subscription in return. So the pro here is a value-added product that promotes customer lock-in and retention. So the more that I use MailChimp, the more that it's better for me to stay with it. So I have all my email templates, I have my sign-up forms, I have my, of course, email list of participants, of subscribers, and that's more difficult for me to move to another solution, even if I get over the 2,000 subscriber limit, and ultimately we'll have to start paying. So target market also tends to be businesses, which tend to have higher budgets than consumers and probably stick around longer. So it may be hard to get into the businesses themselves and actually make them into your clients, but once you do, they'll probably stick with you and you can charge more than you would be able to as to other consumers. On the negative side, it's very time and money intensive, and it requires a long-term commitment to high quality support, as well as the challenge to acquire initial customers. So it's very hard to get those first customers, and once you do, because you're delivering on a monthly basis or a daily basis a lot of value and you get paid on a monthly basis, you actually have to make sure that the product stays strong enough so that you keep your customers and they're happy. And then, so let's talk about building your websites and software. So these are some cool tools that you can use to build your own websites and mobile apps as well. So there's websites, connected services, and visual programming. So let's talk about those. And once again, this keeps you out of having to be a developer yourself. I'm not sure if anyone here is an active or practicing developer, but this is how I made it work for me. So on the simple side for making a quick website, I strongly recommend using WordPress. There's tons of free plugins, there's tons of free templates. Even if you have to buy a template, which ultimately I finally did, it was something like 30 or 40 euros, so it's very cheap. Most, all of the plugins I'm using for free right now, so it's a fantastic solution to be able to get basically an interface that allows you to customize and optimize everything to the point that you want to. Of course, if you want a more unique solution, you might actually have to go on the design focus side of things with Webflow, all the publishing as examples. But that tends to be much more designer focused and might require some knowledge of HTML and CSS. Typeform is a really cool free tool as well that allows you to create a simple form website, if that makes sense. So whether that's a survey, that's a natural implication or use case of it, it's also possible to say, make it into a sign-up form. Hey, put in your email address here, submit that, and to be able to do that to quickly make a website. You can also use these two sites, so Sheet2Site as well as Sheetsu, as examples to be able to take a Google Sheet and turn that into a full website. So it'll do this for you pretty much automatically. So here it's best cities for digital nomads, and it takes all of that information from Google Sheets. So you put the sheet together and it'll output this site for you, typically for a small cost or maybe for free. So then there's another aspect of this which is okay, so I've got the signups that are coming in from my WordPress website as an example. So where do I manage that data? Where do I manage in terms of content management system or CMS or database? And basically you have Fieldbook, Airtable are two examples here, where you can sort of turn this into also similar to the way that you could use Google Sheets into a website as well. So these are some interesting tools to look at to have a relatively cheap backend to your website or to your service. So another really cool tool that I still need to better make use of, and I'm trying to as much as I can, is some ways to connect different services to make things more automated for you. So you can use if IFTTT or if this, then that. So basically it allows you to set a trigger in terms of using one service. So let's say you get an email subscriber and then you want to add them to another list. It can allow you to basically set up these, if this happens, then I want you to do this. And the same way with Zapier, and basically connect a multitude of APIs using a graphical interface. So as opposed to having to do the coding to send one piece of data from this one service to another service, here you can basically I'll show you here. So let's say that I get a new email in Gmail, that's the trigger. Then the action is to copy the attachment from Gmail to Dropbox. And then after that, it can alert me in Slack about a new Dropbox file. So there's basically a way that you can connect all these free services and use Zapier for free, or at least allows you to connect one service to another and maybe not make that third step of the Slack action there. But to be able to do that then actually allows you to have a lot of work done, automated, without any developer help whatsoever, and get more done in a smaller team. You can also learn about how to make some cool products using free tools like Zapier, Typeform, Stripe. There's a number of options there at this website, Code Free Startup. So definitely check that out if you're interested in learning more about some tutorials for making your own service in 5 or 6 hours from free tools. Next, talking about visual programming, getting near the end here. So Bubble and Siberian basically allow you to, whether it's web apps, mobile apps, be able to create that using a visual interface and manage that yourself as opposed to actually having to get into the code. So you can see here for Bubble, there's a drag and drop UI. So hey, what do I want to have on this website? And what do I want to have happen? So if the user signs in or they sign up with the sign up button clicked, then what happens next? And then you also can add in a lot of plugins like MailChimp that we talked about, Mixpanels, more for marketing, Stripe is for payments. So it allows you to basically create an entire working web app from a visual dashboard interface. Granted, it's not going to have maybe exactly everything that you want. It's a more generalized tool, but it's a relatively cheap solution to get your first MVP out there. So, before I finish, let's just go through a couple things in summary, a reminder of where we've been in this talk and where it's headed so far. So, the typical sort of route is that you're losing money as you're trying to get the metrics going, as you're trying to have enough traction to be able to raise the next round, and it tends to ultimately bankrupt a lot of small companies that have a lot of potential and might just need more time and more focus on generating that revenue over the long term. So bootstrapping is quite different from this typical model by moving you toward, maybe it takes a little longer, it takes a little bit more work because you're actually doing it with a smaller team or maybe by yourself, but you can build it sustainably over time. You have a longer runway, ideally, and less expectations because you are able to actually own and build your business yourself as opposed to giving that ownership up to other people. So I won't go through these again, but there's a multitude of different business ideas that you can try to pursue on your own to be able to build a bootstrap business with relatively low capital requirements up front. So you've got content in terms of books, newsletters, online courses, podcasts, and so on. Goods and services, you can build your own Shopify store, Fiverr, and do some services there. And then subscription boxes is one example of a recurring service, recurring good, excuse me. And then lastly, on the software side, we talked about Bubble to be able to make web apps. Siberian is more for mobile apps, or you could even go as simple as taking a service to move from Google Sheets, which is very easy to use and free, to turn that into its own website as well. So what I want to get to here in closing is this idea that you actually need to move. I think it's best to move from talking to your customers more and focusing less on coding up front. So even if you are a developer, even if you love getting into the code, most people's instinct is to build something first and then see if it actually has any resonance with the customer, if it has any traction. Whereas here, these are a lot of ways that, I was able to get out a podcast. I mean, it takes a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but I was able to get out a podcast with relatively low investment, and I learned a ton along the way, and now I can actually see, is that successful? I didn't have to get out a full website first, although I did because it's part of the Expat Empire brand, which I already had a website for. But ultimately, it really allows you, as you think about this, to do stuff without having to hire another developer, without having to spend a ton of time exactly positioning every pixel of your website or your mobile app, and to be able to put something out there, to be able to get some feedback on it, and have those conversations, or even looking at the data and understanding, are people using this? So it's better than coding for 2 years before you release something that nobody uses, right? So, as I mentioned, I hope to continue working on this no-code bootstrapping project, which will be online courses around things that I've learned in my own experiences and from other people about bootstrapping. So this is just starting up. I'll keep you guys updated if you're interested, if you want to join the newsletter at no-codebootstrapping.com. So yeah, hopefully more to come there soon. And that's all I've got. This, you feel free to contact me on my email here. Put up a new website, davidmcneill.co as well, or you can add me on LinkedIn. But I'm definitely happy to answer any questions, or if there's anything following up to this that you think about, feel free to drop me a line. But I'm very thankful for the opportunity. So thanks for having me, and would love to take any questions if you have any.